So tonight's speaker is Cam Miller, and he is a triple threat. He's a filmmaker, writer, and composer. He's made several films, some of which are Riverfront Remembered, which is probably the most well-known, Old Latonia, and Tannenhill, the Baseball Brothers of Dayton, Kentucky. So you can check out his stuff on Facebook and YouTube. You got your YouTube channel, I think. So he's presented on many subjects throughout the city. The story of the Covington Blue Sox, which I think is a really cool story. And we're excited to have him here, so please welcome Cam Miller.
I'm not as tall as my man over here, but I'm ready down a notch. How you guys doing tonight? Very good. Okay. Thank you for the introduction. That was fantastic. And before I go any further and talk about me, which I'm very good at, let me say, first of all, round of applause to the people that make this happen. Just unbelievable. I love these type of events because it gives me a chance to talk to people that I can see face out here and not just posting a video on YouTube, or if you go to the Hall of Fame, you've seen my work at the Reds Ballpark. I love doing events like this because I can take my time. I say that in jest because sometimes I do these talks and I have to be drugged off the stage because I won't shut up. But
there's no stage.
There's no stage here, so I'm free to do what I want, right?
We got a hook, Cam. We got a hook.
Oh, you got a hook back here? Okay, good. I'll keep that in mind.
We need it.
Please, because I practiced this today because I did a talk at the American Sign Museum about signs in general, and I just took the beer aspect of it and put it into this presentation. I was like, no, this will work. I think this will be fun. And I did it, and I was like, okay, you're at 3 hours, Cam. Shut up. And then some more. Part of the problem being a filmmaker is I've got all these films that the director's cut's going to be on Netflix one day, I hope. There's all these stories I've told. But I have been working with the Reds Hall of Fame for 20 years now. I was full-time for the Reds for several years. I tell the story all the time. My first day on the job was 2004, and I was told that I was going to be working at the Hall of Fame. I was like, okay, this is going to be great. Okay, well, we need you to go to the gala event that's going to be happening in whatever it was, December, November, before the Hall of Fame opened for good in 2005. And they're like, just come on to the ballpark and we'll tell you what to do. So I go down to the ballpark and I open the door, and to my right is Spark Anderson. He's talking to Joe Morgan, Ken Griffey Jr. and Sr. over here, cutting up like fathers and sons do. Johnny Bench is over there. George Foster and David Concepcion are having a good time, having drinks over here. I'm like, this is my job? I get to, am I in the right place? Because it was, the first night was unbelievable. Of course, it was all downhill from there. But it was a fantastic event. I got to work at the Hall of Fame with some great people and the Cincinnati Reds. And then I decided to branch out because what I was doing was, during the day, I like to call myself, I was a carny. If you remember the old Hall of Fame, before they did renovations, they had the speed pitch, and they had all these things up on the third floor. Well, my job was to walk around and pick up the balls and go over here, and I do an education program, so I was the education director, and I do that, and then I come back and pick up all the baseballs, and so I was basically a carny. Step right up. But then at night, I'd go home, put on a pot of coffee, and I'd start making the films that they would show in the Hall of Fame. So it got to be a little much, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to start camera films. And it's just been an incredible journey. I've got to work with some fantastic people. I'm composing films, mostly foreign films in Germany and France. Actually, tonight after this, I have to race home and do a West Coast Zoom call because the director he speaks French, I do not, and we're going to go around and around about what I can write and what I can't write. So that's going to be fun tonight. But tonight you're here for baseball, and I am going to, hopefully this will work. Let's see if I can do this. Like I said, what I want to do is I want to talk about the beer signage, very specifically the beer signs at all of the ballparks that the Reds had. So we'll start here. We have to start with the history because let me tell you something. I get in arguments on Twitter all of the time. I get in arguments all the time with Greg Rhodes, my dear friend, about the history of the Reds. And with the Castellinis, we argue about a lot of things, but we argue about this a lot. I am going to give you the history of the Reds that it kind of fits the talk, but it's also kind of just a primer to let you know this is how it happened. In 1869 to 1870, the Red Stockings. We know them, we love them, we know their story. They were undefeated, it was fantastic. They kind of started not just baseball, professional sports. They were the first openly professional baseball team. So, they last 1869 to 1870. Fantastic, what a team. 1871-75, there's no professional baseball in Cincinnati. So imagine that. All the summers were just semi-pro teams and amateur teams. 1876 to 1879, the Reds returned in the newly formed National League. Okay, so 3 years they're in the new National League. The reason why they came back is very interesting. In 1875, there were two professional baseball teams in the tri-state area. There was the Ludlow team in Ludlow, Kentucky, and the Covington Stars. And I did a film on the Covington Stars, which you can find on my YouTube channel. If you go to Cam Miller Films, you'll see the film I did in the Stars a couple years ago. And their importance cannot be understated because while there was no professional baseball in 1871 through 1875, that spring of 75, the Covington Stars said there's still a hunger for baseball in this area. People still will pay money to watch baseball. So they formed, along with Ludlow, two separate entities, Ludlow and Covington professional baseball teams. And they packed the house. Thousands upon thousands of people, not just from northern Kentucky, but Cincinnati as well, came to the park. I'm doing a film on Ludlow right now. I'm building a 3D model of the field. It's taken some time to figure out exactly where it was and try to figure out. It was the first field, Ludlow's field was the first one that was on the river. So if you're in Cincinnati and you're looking at Fifth Street and you look straight across, the Fifth Street Ferry from Cincinnati goes straight across to Ludlow, and the park was right along the river. And legend has it, actually it did happen, George Wright, Harry's brother, from the famous Red Stockings, hit a ball into the river, the first time it ever happened. He hit a ball that went into the river. And I made a big deal about that a couple of years ago, and they said, well, we're going to give you the money. The Reds like, well, what do you want us to do? Give you the money, do a scuba exhibition, try to get the ball? It's like, no, I just want you to know that this happened. So the Covington team and the Ludlow team, they are professional teams. They pack them in. Late summer of 1875, some of the old Red Stockings guys, some of the higher ups that were owners of the Red Stockings and members of the Red Stockings were like, well, wait a minute. If Covington's going to make all this money, and Ludlow, more Covington than Ludlow, Covington made a lot of money on that 1875 team. They were playing the Chicago White Sox, they were playing the Boston Red Sox. Covington had a lot of teams that came in here and played. And again, my film tells you the whole story of them. But the Covington, they were getting too big for their britches, according to the Cincinnati people, because they're like, well, wait a minute, all these Cincinnati dollars are going across the river to Kentucky to watch this professional team. Let's restart the Reds. Why don't we? So in 1875, they built a field, Avenue Grounds. They are semi-pro. They're kind of feeling their way through it. And then in 1876, they decide, you know what? We are going to become professional. So they, of course, join the National League. And what did they do? They are the ones that introduced to the rest of the owners in the National League this new rule called the 5-mile clause. And the 5-mile clause means that no team can operate within 5 miles of another team. It's why you see today that Florence Freedom works, because they're 20 miles away from Cincinnati. You can't put a team in Newport, you can't put a team in Covington. Their minor league baseball doesn't work there because of the 5-mile clause. It's still in effect today. So, when Covington is furious, they're like, well, this is ridiculous, we're going to challenge you to a game. So they play them, and of course Covington ties them the first time, and the second time, because there's no lights, it gets dark, they tie the game. They play them again in Cincinnati this time, and Covington beats them. And the Reds are not happy about that. So, of course, they form this rule. Covington is squashed, Ludlow is squashed. No more professional baseball. And to this day, it's why there's no professional baseball. There was talk in 1901, of the Chicago White Sox moving to Covington. Charles Comiskey had a deal in place, and since it was a different league, he could get away with it. The American League was different than the National League then. So they were going to build a field in Covington, and Chicago, he was in Minneapolis at the time, and decided to go to Chicago and become the White Sox. But it was this close, but he was such good friends with the Reds owner, Comiskey was, because he was a former Red himself, right? He decided, I'm not going to ruffle any feathers, I'm going to go to Chicago. But there was a really small chance, but it was very close that we could have had. So the 1919 World Series would have been a totally different kind of experience. So again, the Covington Stars are gone now. These new Reds team forms. In 1880, this is the one that we just discovered. The Reds Hall of Fame, Jim Farmer, a good friend of mine, who works at the Reds Hall of Fame, colleague of mine, we found out that in 1880, they were not called the Cincinnati Reds. The 1876-79 Reds fold. A new ownership group takes over, and they become the Cincinnati Stars. So for one glorious season, I say glorious in jest because they were actually awful. They were terrible. I can't remember what their record was, but they were like something like 7-57. It was awful, awful, awful. But the Cincinnati Stars replaced the Reds in the NL, and their thing is we're going to sell beer. Because why not? Cincinnati and beer, hand in hand.
Right.
Again, it's such a fascinating discovery that we took it to baseball, and they're slow to recognize it because it gets complicated. And if one thing I've learned working with Major League Baseball over the last 20 years, when I've had to get rights for certain things, they work very slowly. So we're still trying to get that in the record books that the 1880 team's not called the Reds, they're called the Cincinnati Stars. Just it would make great merchandising, right? You can have a Cincinnati Stars t-shirt, 1880, one time only, right? We're working on that. It'll be in my book. So in October of 1880 actually, 7 of the 8 NL teams signed a pledge to not sell beer at the park. The Reds are the only club not to sign because of course they're not. Are you kidding me? Cincinnati and beer, hand in hand. How can you take that away from us? In 1881, there's no team because they refused to play. So 1881, no baseball in Cincinnati. A couple of semi-professional teams, some amateur teams, but no pro ball. 1882, the Reds are reborn in the New American Association. And what do? They win the whole thing. Bid McPhee, Reds Hall of Famer, who, by the way, deserves a statue at the ballpark, and that's another subject we'll get to one day. 1882, the Reds are reborn. They win the championship, okay? I'm actually in talks right now, and this week I have a meeting where we're trying to get a pennant made for the 1882 team because they're not recognized right now. 1919 is the one that gets recognized as the first world championship. That's fine. Your Cincinnati Reds that you know and love, and I hate to break this to you, some of you are going to be upset. They were born in 1882, not 1869. So when you go to MLB.com, shop, and you buy established 1869, it's not true. It is not true. It's fine because people love to say we're the oldest franchise. Cincinnati is home to the first professional baseball team, correct. But they are not the first team. The Atlanta Braves actually hold that distinction. They're the oldest continuing professional baseball franchise. So when you see established 1869, it's in the ballpark, and believe me, we fight about it. Like I said, we fight about it, history. It's very important to get facts right. The 1882 Reds are the same franchise that you know and love today. And to me, it's awesome because their first year of existence, they win the whole thing. How cool is that? Again, we're working on trying to get a pennant that says 1882 Reds because it's very important to me, and it's very important to the guys at the Hall of Fame that we recognize that that is the way it is. 1890, the Reds rejoin the NL. They leave the American Association and they come back to the National League because the National League said, okay, fine, you can sell beer. They realized that there was a market. NL was not stupid. They're like, we have to let Cincinnati in because look at all these people that make up Reds fans then. So that is a short, I try to keep it short, brief history of the Cincinnati Reds. So hopefully you remember some of that. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll see me rant and rave about this the rest of the year. Okay, so let's get to the signs and beer while we're here in the first place. 1869, the very first professional baseball team. They play at Union Grounds. I didn't put the model on here, but I made a model, a 3D model. It'll be in another film I'm doing on the ballparks. But if you go to Union Terminal today, there's a plaque that says home of the Red Stockings, and that's the ballpark. And on that plot of land where the ballpark was, one of the first things they did when they formed the Red Stockings to be a professional team was they said, hey, we need refreshment stand, but we can, for the skating season, because they flooded it in the winter so they can make money, of course. That's what good businessmen do. If you can't play baseball, you're going to have a skating season. We're going to sell beer, for a nickel, you can buy giant glass, but no spirits, liquors on the grounds. And you can write George Geller, 143 Main Street, which is down by Great American Ballpark, ironically. And they sold beer. It's where it started. So when you think of beer and baseball, that is where it began. It was selling by the pint at Union grounds. Now, this is where the beer and the Reds and baseball kind of, this is why it makes sense. And I said this kind of earlier. The annual per capita beer consumption per family, America was 16 gallons average. Cincinnati, 40 gallons a year. Shocking, right? Shocking information, right? So of course, if that's the case, then you're going to need breweries. And I listed some here. There's so many that came and went. But these breweries that started here from the 1840s on, some even earlier, they're very important in our history, obviously. And it's part of who we are, the German heritage, what makes Cincinnati unique. But there were so many breweries, and baseball and beer just went together. Now, the first team played at the Union grounds, right, 1869. There's no evidence there was any beer advertising. As a matter of fact, there's no evidence that there was any advertising on the walls at all. It's shocking to think now that there was no advertising in a baseball game, right? In 1884, the Cincinnati Reds moved to a little corner called Finley and Western, and they start in 1884 where they would last until 1970, right? The golden age of Reds ballpark fence ads was 1894 to 1933. Those years, it was wall-to-wall advertising, as you can see by that very grainy photo taken in the 1890s. Just packed the cigar place, but no beer, not yet. 1894, about midway through the season, Moorline's Beer, that's the model that I drew of the ballpark on the right. Moorline's Beer, absolutely pure. The very first beer sign ever produced for a baseball team in Cincinnati. That was it. And it's on the right field where the bleachers would have been in Crosley. That's where that sign was located. It was about 50 feet long, 5 feet high. The fences were only about 5 feet high, and it said Moorline's Beer, absolutely pure. On the left, you see the Bellevue Brewing Company. They had an advertisement outside of the ballpark, a giant photo that looked just like that, that must have taken forever to hand paint on those old wooden fences. So the two first beer signs advertising beer in Cincinnati for a baseball park, Bellevue Brewing Company and Moorline's. And you can kind of see it here on the right-hand side of this photo, which is a pantographic that I had to stitch together. It says Moorline's Beer on the right. That's basically the layout of Crosley Field. This picture is in the 1890s, so this is before it became Redland Field, Crosley Field, that you've probably seen many photos of. This is that same dimension and setup. Moorline Beer sign was out there for many, 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 many years. It's just a fantastic photo. You don't see very many photos of 1890s Reds ballparks. And again, advertising. And you can see the little dark area there in center field because batters were complaining that they couldn't see with all that mumbo-jumbo in the background, which is why today you have a black background in all the ballparks. The Reds were first in a lot of things. They were the very first club to do this as well, to make a quote-unquote batter's eye. In 1900, there you can see the sign very clearly there, Moorline Beer, absolutely pure. There was a fire in the grandstand. This is right before Palace of the Fans was built. So there's a fire. They had to reconfigure the field. So what they did was they went out to right field and put home plate and faced it the other direction towards the west. So in this photo, you can see that the third baseman is standing there, and then there's a batter in the background. The Moorline Beer, imagine Great American Ballpark, if we put it in reference. That would be pretty much the dugout section of Great American Ballpark where the Reds sit. Okay, so now a model that I did at Palace of the Fans, because I don't know if any of you went to the Hall of Fame last year. They had, for members, little models of all the ballparks. I was lucky enough to design those. It was so fun to do. I got to design all the ones that, they already had somebody do Crosley because they already knew how to do it, but they didn't have any idea about the dimensions and what to do for League Park and Palace of the Fans, because you see models, but it was hard to make it. And of course I went overboard and I put all of the ads, and they're like, Cam, we don't need all the advertisements. We don't need all this detail. But this is where it is. Cut what you want, but this is what you're going to get from me. So Palace of the Fans is 1902 because the grandstand burns. They decide to rebuild this magnificent structure. And here you see some photos you normally don't see, because when you think of Palace of the Fans, what do you think about? You think about, when you go to the Hall of Fame, the gigantic, ornate background that says Cincinnati chiseled in stone behind home plate. You never see, very few photos of the outfield, okay? So this is the outfield of the Palace of the Fan, and like I said before, we're in that golden age of advertising. There's so many ads that are plastered on these boards. Again, beer ones are very, very few, which is surprising, because you think that besides Moorline, who had that corner market there and that prime spot of real estate, there wasn't very many, a lot outside, but that's going to change. This is a football game of Xavier University, okay? This is Xavier University, 1902, I believe, and they set up and played their home games at House of the Fans. You can see, I think the Mecca there is the sign where you would go get some good beer, but Guggenheimer whiskey, on the scoreboards there where you get your tickets and Fifth and Walnut. What I want you to focus on is on the right. Now you can see where it says drink, brew. That's part of the sign in center field. There's a beer bottle.
Right.
And there's the rest of it. Cincinnati, the very first beer sign at the new Palace of the Fans was Cincinnati beer by the Bellevue Brewing Company. And that was what was on the outfield next to Shot Shoes, and that's the Xavier football team there posing in their fantastic football regalia. So, Cincinnati beer, the very first giant billboard on an outfield wall for the new Palace of the Fans. This is Weber's band playing at Palace of the Fans. Again, a great shot because it's not showing you what you already have seen a million times, it's showing you the other side, the outfield. The reason why I included this photo is, yeah, the advertising is gorgeous back there, but on the Weber Brothers Cafe, which sponsored the Weber Brothers Band, who you see playing there, I believe this was a 4th of July event, there's a sign you can't really make out, but it says Hawks Beer, H-A-U-C-K-S. Hawks Beer was sold at Weber's, and it was the first time on that side of the outfield that they had Hawk Beer, no pun intended. But that was, if you hit that sign, you would win a pint. Not only for the row you sat in, but for the Reds. So you can imagine the Reds players going up to bat and saying, I'm hitting that sign. I'm not playing small ball. I'm not going to hit the right field. I'm going to hit that sign every time. I cannot even imagine the arguments that happened. So that was probably one of the first promotions. Since they hit that sign, you get beer for the row and the Reds club. The John Hawk Beer Company, that's the label that was painted on the outside. There's a very, very grainy photo that I didn't include because you really can't see it, but I had it zoomed in at the Hall of Fame, and we found out this is the label that was out in the back. Just unbelievable detail that they would include on these advertisements. And of course, they would last a couple of seasons, and then they would take them down. Disposable. This is the grandstand, underneath the grandstand of Palace of the Fans. So when you saw all of those beer ads, Cincinnati, and you see Hawks Beer, Moorline, of course, was still in existence on the right field fence. You got thirsty by seeing that advertising, you go down underneath the grandstand on the third base side, and that's the bar, and the lovely bartender there ready to serve you whatever you would like. So we actually talked about, they have a kind of a replica. If you're at the Great American Ballpark, they have a long wooden bar down there. Not exactly like this. We tried to get them to make an exact replica, and they're like, nobody cares. So, you know, the detail again, it's like this is, well, they wanted to make it a little bit more modern, which I understand. I get that. So this is where the bar was along third base sub. And where did you go to drink it? The seats on top were most of the rich people would sit, right? On the bottom is Reuter's Row. And Reuter's Row was where all the rowdies, where you could get 12 beers for $1.
Oh my goodness.
And you would sit there, and here's the great thing about it is, it was in glass mugs.
Oh my.
So you can imagine the fighting that occurred and the craziness. I posted something on Twitter today that I discovered not too long ago. You were so close to the action here because the chain link fence, you can't tell in this picture, but it was about 3 feet high, 3 to 4 feet high. So you could lean over. You're just protected basically from your belly button down, the important part.
up top is exposed. So you are sitting there and you're just having your beer and you're having 12 for $1. You're having a great time and you're yelling and screaming. But one of the great stories that always happened when the Pittsburgh Pirates came to town is Honus Wagner would go there because you're right by the on-deck circle. You're talking to these guys like they're, you know, your best friends. And Honus Wagner would always, hey, can I get a sip of that? Hey, can I get a sip? He would drink the entire game. By the 7th inning, he was tanked. So, of course, the Red players were like, have another one. Here's another one for you, Honus Wagner. Here, have another one. So the manager had to put a stop to that. But it was a great strategy. Can you imagine that today? So this went all the way around the Palace of the Fans. It went, the Rooters Row went all the way around. This is where the rowdies liked to hang out, and it became a popular spot. At field level, literally, you were on the field right there, very, very close to the action. So this is from a program. Now, why I included this, on the left side, you see a picture from the program, 1902-03, I believe. You see at the top, Anheuser-Busch, the only national brand advertised in the Reds program. They didn't have an outfield space because that was for the local brands, but they did advertise in the programs that you could get Anheuser-Busch beers at the bar. And of course, Moerlein beers, who were just so popular at this era, and they sold the most beer at these ballparks. And they had that record for a long, 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 long time. We'll get back to Anheuser-Busch here in a minute, but I thought it was very interesting that they had been around Cincinnati baseball since the 1900s, early 1900s. You wouldn't think that. You'd think it'd be all local, but they were making their play for national dominance even back then. Under the grandstand on the first base side of Palace of the Fans was a place called Outing Cafe, where you could get cool drinks, fine cigars, and most importantly, attentive waiters. That's the important thing. The waiters were attentive. At least that's what they are telling us. Refreshments, cold lunches, popular prices. So the great thing about this was the Outing Cafe on the first base side of Palace of the Fans was open year-round. So you could go down to the ballpark anytime you want to, kind of like the machine room used to be at the Great American. It was open year-round, when it was open, that is. So the Outing Cafe was one of the first places, first times in baseball history that a restaurant was in the ballpark and it was for public use.
Wow.
Now we get into Redland Field, 1912. So Palace of the Fans has its run. You've got Moerlein that's really killing. A couple of advertising signs. You don't have a lot at this point. You're really not, there's not a lot of different signage that goes on. Just a few, like I showed you the Cincinnati, and then of course the Moerlein, which lasted 30 years on the right side. So they felt that they really didn't have to advertise it that much because people were going to go down there and drink anyway. That's just the way it was.
Right.
So this is opening day, 1912, the very, very first game at the new Redland Field, which would become Crosley Field. Now, you'll notice something in this photo. Lots of people, of course, and of course on the field, because they allowed that then, because they were going to sell tickets, and they'd find a place to put them. So they would line the outfield walls for opening day, any kind of big game, Memorial Day, Decoration Day as it was called then, and 4th of July. But you'll notice that there's no advertising. So we went from all of those ads, just packed, every square inch was taken with ads, no ads and no beer ads. 1912, only ad you see is for the barber shop place up there at the very top of the factory where you get your barber chair. So other than that, besides the laundry factory, which was the electronic factory before it became Superior Linen and Towel, which we'll get to in a minute, they'll play an important role. There's a little close-up of the barber chair factory, so that's it. No advertising on any of the walls. They decided not to do it. Why? There's many theories, but they decided that no advertising on any of these walls in 1912. But when you get into 1920, 20s, 1922, 23, this is Ed Roush at bat, really great shot. He's actually being photographed for a how-to-play baseball book that they were putting together. So there's a Cardinals guy throwing to him there, and they're kind of just doing some different baseball moves. But you'll notice the advertising out in the outfield. Now they've really decorated it up. All kinds of advertising. Advertising on first base for Epirixie and his insurance company because he retired, and he said, hey, can you help me out and put a sign up there? They said, sure. Collars, Boston Garter, all kinds of signs, but no beer. First base shot, right down the line. That's a large man running down first base, by the way. He's a big guy. Let me go back here. So yeah, Boston Garter, Arrow shirts. Again, lots of great advertising. No beer. Western Bank and Trust with the clock in the left field wall. Nope, no advertising for beer. Western Bank and Trust. There's another shot of it. Standard Electric, which would become Superior Lemon and Towel. There's their sign right there in the back. Another shot of the scoreboard. Great. Underwear, of course. That's important. The Dolly Varden chocolates, where if you hit the sign, you would win a 5-pound box of chocolates. All kinds of advertising signs. Again, no beer signs. Look at all that. All those advertising signs. Dolly Varden's a closer look. I believe that's Ed Roush, maybe. I think it is. He's for the camera for that how-to book.
Because Prohibition was between 1920 and 1933. So of course, the Reds decided to put ads back on, but the beer companies are left in the dark because there's no beer. They're making pop or whatever they're making, or they're making stuff and having parties in other places in the city. But they weren't going to advertise beer. So from 1920 to 1933, there's no beer advertising at all, for obvious reasons. Now we get to Crosley Field. 1934 happens. Hal Crosley Jr. buys the club. He's talked into, it wasn't his idea to name it Crosley Field. He was talked into it. Members of his family, Larry McPhail, the owners, they all said, hey, we need to name this after you. So Redland becomes Crosley Field in 1934. Interestingly enough, the only advertising that Mr. Crosley allowed was his radio, a replica on the left of the scoreboard there, and a Crosley refrigerator on the right of the scoreboard there.
Right.
Of course he would, because he's Crosley and he can do whatever he wants. But nobody else can advertise. So now Prohibition's over, and the beer company's like, well, now we can put more lines, like, can we put our sign back? Nope. Anheuser-Busch? Nope. All these beer companies, Bellevue Brewing? Nope. If I'm going to have a field, it's going to do my stuff. The problem is that those distracted the batters. They lasted 2 weeks. And the players were like, we cannot see with that shiny refrigerator in the outfield. Can you please, Mr. Crosley, for the love of everything, take it down? So he took it down on the brand new scoreboard that he built out there. And you can see there, just an interesting fact, to the right is the flagpole in the field of play. And if you hit the flagpole, it's a live ball. So, and it's hard to do, obviously, hit a flagpole, but it happened a few times. So the first billboard atop the laundry, which is what they call the building in left field, which was Superior Linen and Towel Company, which in the photos before I showed you was an Standard Electric, was Heidelberg Brewery Student Prince Beer in 1938. Before that, they had put a billboard up, because remember, this is not in the park, so Crosley has no control over billboards that are on the outside of the park. And when they figured that out, it was a free-for-all. So Lifebuoy soap goes out in left field. So if you see pictures of Jackie Robinson or the first night game, you'll see the Lifebuoy logo on a giant 75-foot billboard on top of that building. But this is the shot now as the 1939 World Series takes place. The Reds and the Yankees. Student Prince billboard out there. I love that billboard. It's got the protruding guy, the logo, Student Prince, and the bottle of beer tipping over like it's being poured. 75 feet long, colorful, beautiful. All of these signs are in the outfield, not on the premises of Crosley. And Crosley didn't like it, but he didn't really have a choice. I mean, that's just kind of the way it was. There was nothing he could do about it. So there's 3 beer signs in this photo. And Red Top Beer is in center field by where the barber factory was, and then right next to that was my favorite sign of all time. It says, you can't see the top of it, but it says, on sale at Crosley Field, and it's a blue and red Utica beer sign, which sat up there, and it's really, really beautiful. I've got some color stills from some video we were editing not too long ago for my Crosley film, and this is 1939, and you can see the colors. There was yellow and red, just beautiful, 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 beautiful advertising. And the art, because it is art. I mean, let's be honest. These are works of art. That's Ernie Lombardi in the bottom frame there with the Red Top Beer advertising on the old building out there. And the Student Prince sign became popular because
if you hit the sign, you would get a Gruen Curvex watch. And that happened quite a few times where players had hit that sign. And later they would win a suit with Siebler suits. But before that, before the Siebler suit promotion, kind of like the Toyota Tundra promotion of today, if a player hits it, nobody's going to hit that Toyota, by the way. It's not. I'm just going to let you know now. Never has, never will. It's not going to happen. And that's by design. So if the player hits this sign, they win a Gruen Curvex watch on the Student Prince beer sign. So Heidelberg Brewery, continuing their tradition, they get the rights and they put the heirloom beer sign out there in the 40s. Just a beautiful, beautiful color photo. You can see the terrace there up the hill, so just think about that. Think about today, Great American Ballpark, a hill going into left field that you have to run up. Now there's a story that Babe Ruth ran up, fell down, got laughed at, and retired a few days early. I don't know if that's true or not, but he did fall. He was not happy about it when he was playing an exhibition game. So, another color photo, kind of worn, but you can see just the beautiful, the thing about this is, besides the heirloom beer and then the Barbarossa beer sign up there, is the hats and the glory, beautiful, just the era. It's such a great era, especially when it comes to baseball. It's just a beautiful, beautiful, Carlsbad was such a beautiful park. And you can see the advertising, again, not in park, but out of the park with the line. But again, Heidelberg Brewery's got a monopoly on the top of that, on the prime spot. Heirloom Beer of Heidelberg, they would advertise, and again, they're from Covington, Kentucky. And the reason I tell you that is because every single billboard on top of the laundry, as it was called, Wade Hoyt, when he was broadcast, would always say, he hit that on top of the laundry, which meant he hit it on top of the laundry building. Every single billboard, whether it was Student Prince, Heirloom, and another I'm about to show you now, all of those billboards were from beer brewed in Covington, Kentucky. There is the heirloom sign, and then you see a little bit closer of the Crosley Field, on sale at Crosley Field sign, which I know it's a different time and era, but you do not know how many times when I'm editing a film and I come across, I'm like, why didn't somebody save that? Can you imagine the Sign Museum having that, or even Reds Hall of Fame having that sign? Just a beautiful, beautiful sign. And there it is in color.
Wow.
And that is, it lit up at night, neon, just amazing. This is a still from the photo where they are raising the 1940 World Champion pennant, because they used to do things like that back in the day. When you won the pennant, you won the pennant. When you won the World Series, you put a flag up, and both teams would go out to center field, take their caps off, they'd sing the national anthem, and they would raise the flag atop the ball field. In 1941, opening day, they did such a thing at Crosley Field, and I captured the still of it because it showed the beautiful beer sign. Just fantastic, fantastic sign. And there you see in all its glory the heyday with the beer signs in the back, the Young and Berkey sign of the Walking Tin Man, that I'm sure most of you know and love. But again, the end of an era, 1940 World Series. Again, 1940 World Series, and you'll see a new advertiser, Brooks Beer, makes an appearance. Yes, Brooks Beer, red and white sign, high above center field. And another player in the 50s, as we move on into the 1950s decade, is Hudepohl.
Right.
And when the guy would go through the crowd, he would say, "Get moody with Hootie." That's what he would chant. And right there, the sun deck, the bleachers at Crosley, just a phenomenal picture with the ground rules, of course, written on or painted on the field. But again, all of the advertising. So we've gone away from advertising in stadium, and we're all outside the stadium. Now, this is a fantastic, fantastic photo, and I showed this photo at my talk at the American Sign Museum a few weeks ago. First of all, it's awesome because it's a color photo from the 50s, before everything started to be torn down. You see the Weedman in the middle there, Tuxie, Petrie, and Coke. Right in the middle is the Weedman, "It's registered." That was their slogan, "It's registered." I feel like there was a Mad Men episode that they could have done with "It's registered." That was the trademark for Weedman for so many years. The Weedman sign in the back is the only beer sign on that side besides the left, which will be the new Covington Brewery, that they get their time to shine on the laundry. But if you look at the picture of the players, there are three police officers on the first base side there. One with the red cap walking towards the field, and there's two guys, and then the guy in the middle is Jackie Robinson.
Really?
This is a Brooklyn Dodgers game, and the game had just ended. The Brooklyn Dodgers win, and he's walking off the field. And I had saved this photo for other reasons. For my film I'm doing on Finley and Western, I'm doing a film on the park and all the parks that came before it, Crosley. And we're going through mountains and mountains of footage of the Hall of Fame. I said, wait a minute, hold on. And I zoomed in the scoreboard, it says Brooklyn. And then I looked and found out when it was, and I said, that's Jackie Robinson walking off the field. You don't see too many shots of Jackie Robinson at Crosley, besides when you see the movie. And but yeah, that's just a fantastic, fantastic photo. Now, again, Covington, leading the charge. Another great shot, that's Big Clue, flying out. Beautiful shot, and we had Student Prince, we had Heirloom, now we have Bavarian, which, I'm sorry ladies, but apparently it's a man's beer. I had nothing to do with that, I promise you. But Bavarian, brewed in Covington. And they have a very great history with the Covington Blue Sox. If you watch my film about that, the owner was spearheaded the Covington Blue Sox in 1913 and put a Federal League team in Covington. But his brewery gets the spotlight again. That's prime real estate out there. And again, all of it is Covington related, which I found surprising. Siebler's suit sign is on the right of the Bavarian beer sign, where if you hit it, you win a suit. Welly Post won the most suits. And Willie Mays was the visiting player that won a ton of suits from Siebler. And there was a Siebler suit sign, which was on the Bavarian. It's provided a player to hit, or Welly Post, Willie Mays. But the cool thing about this is not just it was a neat little promotion, but also if you see there it says 407, they put the distances on the sign, on the beer side. So right above where it says wins every time, there's a 407 foot sign. So people knew how far that it did. And back then, that was a shot. That was a lot to hit it up there, but that was on top of the Superior Linen and Towel. 1950s, Udipole gets a color sign out by the bleachers there. Just a beautiful sign. All of those great signs, but the Udipole sign was new. Love those old signs of the 40s and 50s. They just have such a pop to them, such color. And there's a shot, Big Clue at bat, Brooklyn Dodgers, Sunday afternoon at the old ball yard. You got the Bavarian's Old Style beer, and it's got the markers at the top there of the distance to the sign across the street of York Street. Now, Wade Hoyt, of course, as you know and love, the great broadcaster for many years with the Reds, he wasn't actually employed by the Reds, he was employed by Burger Beer. So that meant a new sponsor, Burger Beer and Wade Hoyt. But interestingly enough, as popular as Burger Beer was for the Cincinnati Reds and their spokesperson, Wade Hoyt, who was extremely popular, they only had two signs that advertised at Crosley Field. One was that one on the outside there. You see the cars, that's Finley and Western the corner. You can go there today and kind of make it out. If you're driving along there, you can kind of gauge where you're at. And the wall would have been there where the warehouse is now. And the Burger Beer, they had the schedule in black. Is the schedule for the Reds, giant schedule, 12 feet high. And then Burger Beer, of course, their logo and slogan underneath the Crosley Field sign. Unfortunately, that's the only photo I've ever seen of the outside of that. I'm not sure it lasted very long in the mid-50s. And then they had another sign, and it was replaced the Udipole sign, and it was behind the bleachers, and it advertised Burger Beer and Listen to the Redlegs on the radio, and they used to call the bleachers, I'm sure most of you know this, Burgerville. So when Wade Hoyt, a home run was hit, he'd say that ball was hit to Burgerville, because it was hitting at the bleachers. And of course, when they decided to put a Burger Beer sign out there, they had to put it behind where Burgerville was. A packed house at Crosley Field in the 50s. So then 1957, times are changing. They need a new scoreboard. Electronics are entering into the field. They build this elaborate, this is the scoreboard most of you know and love. This is the scoreboard that we all are familiar with. Put up in 1957, and you can see it has 4 panels for advertising. You have Gem Razors, you have Marlboro Man, you have 57 Ford, and on the right, you can barely see it there, it says Udipole, 14K. That Udipole 14K advertisement stayed there for the life of the scoreboard. It was always there. The longest running beer sign for the Cincinnati Reds was that Udipole sign that sat on that scoreboard for 30 years. There's a night shot, it's the unusual. Cardinals, Reds, come see the Bavarian Bruce line with the red legs on top there. Just a great shot, and then there you see the Udipole. The other ones changed, over the years, Marlboro, Pontiac, Kroger, but the Udipole sign stayed in that right corner for the life of that scoreboard. So by the late 50s, all the buildings and billboards come down. As you can see, the glory years there, and then on the right, why is all the buildings gone? Parking, parking, parking. The automobile was king. City, Cincinnati, in their early years decided that it would be a good idea to tear down these buildings, and of course there goes the billboards, but it's for parking. So I guess at the end, Crosley got his wish with no advertising in the outfield and people making money because he tore them all down with the help of Cincinnati. It had to happen, I understand, with progress, I do get it, but there's a part of me that wishes that it could have been saved. It's a touchy subject. There's a lot of pros and cons to it because you look at places like Boston and Wrigley Field and just the charm of that. If there's any city that deserves an old-timey ballpark that lasted 100 and something years, it's Cincinnati. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. As progress came and some great things happened at Riverfront Stadium, as we know. This is again the Udipole sign in color there on the right. That's Tony Perez in his very first game, and he's on first base, and the infield's playing in because they're about to have a winning run score, and Pete Rose is going to deliver that winning run, and the crowd will go wild, and I don't think they jumped up and down and hooped and hollered at home plate. I think they shook hands and went back to the dugout. But Udipole, again, had that piece of real estate on that scoreboard for the length of its life. It's really cool. I didn't know that until recently. I thought that they signed a contract yearly. They did, except Udipole. They got a lifetime contract, and I'm not sure why, but they got a lifetime contract to have that spot. Wiedemann starts to enter into the play as the buildings are gone. The highway is there, but Wiedemann gets two advertising panels. They get one between the upper and lower grandstand, Wiedemann sign there that lit up at night. In the very far background, you see another Wiedemann sign that was neon, that the letters would individually sync. Red, Wiedemann would spell out, which took forever. And you can see, there's some footage I had where you can see it. Sparky's Anderson in his first year is out talking with Johnny Bench, and he's talking, and you just see this glare from the Wiedemann side just flashing on the field. It was really cool. But yeah, Wiedemann gets their shot. They enter back into the mix. And of course they get their spot on the outfield wall because in the mid-60s they start to say, hey, we need to make some money. What about if we put some ads on the outfield wall? It's like, why didn't you do that all of the years? We don't know, but they did not. So Albers, and then you get the Wiedemann Fine Beer, and of course, Udipole again. Now these two shots are very important historically because they're taken the very next morning after the last game. So after the last game at Crosley in 1970, a gentleman went there. It was easy to do because back in those days you could pretty much walk into the ballpark and nobody cared. And he took shots down the third base side and the first base side, the very end, because soon it would be torn down. But the Wiedemann sign there on the first base side and the picture on your right, that's the Wiedemann sign. Each side had one, first and third. But that photo, I just wanted to share it because you see the advertising, the very small portion of advertising they could do there with, Pepsi, Whoppers, and all that. But yeah, just a very historical photo. The very last photo you'll see of the park in its intact. And that's the shot, as you can see before when I showed you the shot with all the buildings and the advertising. Now it's the highway. I-75 in the background. The final years of Crosley, and again, just a few advertising segments there on the wall, panels that are on the wall in left field, but that's it. Now we move on to Riverfront Stadium, 1970. And boy, there's not a lot to talk about at Riverfront Stadium because there wasn't a lot of advertising at Riverfront Stadium. So the very first game, they weren't even finished with the scoreboard yet. So they didn't even have the ad panels done to put up ads on the right and left. They were not finished with a lot of things when Riverfront Stadium was built, but very striking when you see that opening photo behind home plate of the big red machine there lined up, the national anthem being sung, and the advertising panels are still being worked on, under construction. Now, eventually, they did get it, and luckily Fresca jumped on board. Fresca got a prime spot as well as the Reds logo because nobody wanted to commit. No advertiser, especially a beer advertiser, did not want to commit because they weren't sure if things ever going to get finished. So Reds were like, we'll just slap our logo up there for now and see, you can have your product up there in lights. So Fresca was like, we'll take any advertising we can get. They put a Fresca sign over there on the right side and the Reds logo on the left. And of course, in the 70s, you got a Coke sign and the cool cigarette sign there on the left, Pete Rose. And again, this is the only advertising in the park. No advertising on the walls, nothing on the panels. It's basic structure, no advertising except for the scoreboard. Very limited. 20 feet high, 140 feet long. It originally had 2 ad panels, which expanded to 5 ad panels in 1987. Thank you, Mark Stein, when they put the Jumbotron up. And that's what it looked like as they started to expand. Sports Channel, and these of course are the newfangled advertising, which was called the tri-panels, which would flip. So on one thing it'd be Sports Channel there, and it'd flip over and be another thing like Coke or the Marlboro Man or whatever. So you could get more advertising bang for your buck because the panels would rotate every couple of innings. And here's where we come back into Anheuser-Busch. From here on out, 1970, riverfront years, advertising on the scoreboard, in Pixel back then. Unfortunately don't have any of those old ads, but Budweiser was the only beer sponsor in the park's history, and they had their sign up there at the scoreboard from the 80s on. The 70s they had the LED, or the dot matrix version of ads before they put the panels in 1987. And there it is again, beautiful riverfront stadium, Marlboro. They don't do that anymore. Budweiser sign in all its glory. The exclusive, because again, they were the official sponsor of baseball. So this wasn't just a Cincinnati thing. Baseball had a deal with Budweiser. They still do. Budweiser sign there with the Jumbotron in the 1980s. You can see how much it expanded. And in 1995, they said, beer's fine, tobacco is not. And they took down all of the ads riverfront, according to law. All the tobacco signs were removed in 1995, which is really crazy to think. It wasn't that long ago. It was long ago. Well, it wasn't that long ago. And of course, when they decided to, hey, we can make money putting signs in the outfield, what a concept. And they returned again, and this time, you see Barry Larkin there, in 1998. They put Ewart-Packard on the right side and Budweiser on the left side. And Budweiser, again, the official sponsor of baseball. And he gets the prime spot on the outfield wall. And then when the Synergy slice occurred in 2001, the signs and the ads were removed. And they put more ads down on the, of course, the bottom there, which was Budweiser getting the beer spot. But just amazing, look at that photo now and think about what's there now, right? I mean, Great American, riverfront is gone, but the grass field, of course, just crazy to think they put grass there for a year. But again, Budweiser, the sole sponsor. And when they move the scoreboard, Budweiser still gets their spot. A very long, elongated panel sign in the outfield. Then we moved to Great American Ballpark in 2003, 20 years ago, hard to believe.
Yeah.
20 years ago, and the Bud Light now has a spot on the scoreboard. It's a different kind of scoreboard, obviously the riverfront. It's got its panels, but that would change to what it is today. And you can see opening day, packed house, Budweiser on the left there, getting their spot. Again, riverfront, Great American, the only beer signage you will see, Budweiser. The original scoreboard, which was, again, dot matrix in the early years of Great American Ballpark, and now they can put anything they want on the giant HD scoreboard, but it will most undoubtedly be Budweiser related. And then, of course, Great American Ballpark in all its glory with, of course, what's in the right field, the Budweiser Bowtie Bar, making its presence known. There was talk of making that a Rooters Row, like what we saw, making it kind of like a throwback to Rooters Row.
But then they realized that Budweiser was going to give them a lot of money, and they decided to make it a Budweiser and bow tie bar. So that's why it ended up being that, which is fine. I get it. It's a business. Of course, the Frisch's sign no longer there because they ended their contract with the Reds, but the Budweiser bow tie bar stays. And that, my friends, is the end of beer signs in Cincinnati Ballpark. Okay, is there any questions you may have for me about what you just saw? And first of all, did you learn anything?
Yes.
Thank you, because you never know with these things. If people are going to be like sitting there looking at their watches, wait a minute, what year are we in? Looking at their phones, and they're like, wait a minute, is this guy going to talk about the same old stuff I already know? So you never know with the crowd if they're going to learn something. I tried to take some things that maybe you didn't understand or know and kind of put into context. I could have went 3 hours because the politics of beer and the ownership groups of the Reds and the hows and the whys, that's an entirely different thing, which it'll be in the book, as they say in the business, right?
Yeah.
So I am working on some projects that are going to tackle, again, Crosley Field. The title of the film, which I hope to finish this year, it'll be at the Reds Hall of Fame. We'll do a premiere there. We're trying to get Johnny Bench to come in and some of the players that are still around that played at Crosley to be there. Unfortunately, as you know, time moves on, and most of these guys are no longer with us. So the essence, timing is important to get this done. But one of the things is that I want to do this film. I didn't get to go to Crosley. I'm too young for that. But working for 20 years at the Reds, I have come across some amazing things. And I want to tell this story, including the beer signs and that history and how important it was to Cincinnati. I want to tell it because it's not just about Crosley. It's about that corner. From 1884 to 1970, baseball was played at Finley and Western. That's a long time for a little spot in the neighborhood. And it was a neighborhood ballpark. I've got stories of trolley drivers and guys who were walking home and a ball came down. One time a guy caught a ball. He was walking home from work. There's a ball game going on. He caught a ball and turned the radio on and found out it was Stan Musial that hit the home run. He raced around and said, Mr. Musial, can I get your autograph? He said, son, give me the ball. He took the ball. The whole team signed it and gave it back to him. I have millions of those little stories. And I wanted to do this film based upon things like that, not, hi, my name is Marty Brown, and I'm going to tell you the story of Crosley Field. I love Marty. I love the narrations that we use at the ballpark. But I wanted to tell a story about the ballpark from stories that nobody knows. The little people, the ushers, the cigarette girls, and the uniforms they wore, the bat boys. There are so many things about that park and that little corner that I don't think have been touched on in books. The books are fine, but we don't have that, hey, we need to hear the stories of the little people that made baseball so successful in Cincinnati. It's not just the great teams we had, it's the people. But anyway, I could rant all night about that. Is there any questions about beer and baseball? Sir?
2 questions for
Yes.
you. First one is not about beer. Did Cons ever advertise?
Yes, Cons had advertising on not until that big board. So when the big board in 1957 went up, there's 4 panels. Sometimes they had one on the right above the U pole. Sometimes they had one down the left. But yeah, they did advertise just in those mid-60s years.
Okay, because they were the only, as far as we know, the only company that put out baseball cards.
Correct.
The only meat packer
Yeah.
that put
Yeah.
out baseball cards.
Not a lot of meat packing companies putting out baseball cards. That's for sure. I used to collect all those when I was a kid, and do they still do it? Do they do it still? I don't know.
No.
It's over?
They're Cons, yeah.
Because it's unfortunate. Yeah, but you're right. They were the only ones that did that. But yeah, they were a sponsor from the 60s, even into the 80s and 90s. When I would go to the park, I'd get the Cons cards.
Yeah. And the second question, I've always heard that it was Hauk Brewery that started the notion of beer concessions in American baseball. Is that true?
Correct.
So that concessions
Concessions start in a roundabout way. There are other places that kind of sort of did it, but they popularized it. It was not, kind of like how you think the Red Stockings were the first professional team. There were other teams being paid. The Red Stockings were the first openly, they said, yeah, we're paying everybody. Deal with it.
Yeah.
Come play us, we're going to win. So it's kind of like that, where the brewery started taking ideas from other places and made it to what it is today. You know, which is crazy to think about, but that is in the film I'm doing. So you will learn about that.
Cool.
Yes, very cool. Anybody else? Questions? Can I acknowledge somebody first?
Do you mind if I acknowledge? I'm acknowledging.
Warren Brown. Does anybody know Warren Brown? Warren Brown, stand up. A dear friend, a great man. Warren Brown was a bat boy for the Cincinnati Reds in 1970-72, correct, sir? 71, 72. So there's a certain photo that you see that at the end of when Hal McRae scores that run, and there's a BB in the back of this guy's jersey, and he's jumping up and down with the team, and it's Warren Brown. A fantastic photo. I love it so much, and I love Warren. He is a great guy. So, round of applause for Warren. Thanks for coming, Warren. He's got some stories. What a guy. He's doing some things. So, if you get a chance to shake his hand, that's the person